Well, Uncle Doug,
Yo, here am I.
I think that what our listeners really want, other than sports statistics, is financial advice from us.
Yeah, from
Three
us.
guys who really know what the fuck we're talking about when it comes to all matters financial, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I believe you have a story of thrift and good practices as far as saving money for us today.
Thrift is the kindest way to put it, but yes, indeed, I do.
Yeah.
We've discussed many times before on this podcast that making fun of religions seems to be an inexhaustible resource, and we spend more time figuring out what not to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Even and still, sometimes the great spirit in the sky, who is clearly a fan, crafts a story so perfectly calibrated to our show that one is tempted to believe that spirit exists.
Yeah.
Such was the case last week when this headline dropped in the Washington Post like Scrooge McDuck belly flopping in his pool of gold. Quote, Mormon Church has misled members on $100 billion tax-exempt investment fund, whistleblower alleges. I have read this article several times, and each time I am more filled with righteous indignation, enough to power a small city. I'm relatively certain that most of you out there listening to this have seen this headline, either read the article or watched the YouTube clips. So this might be covering some familiar ground, but honestly, does anyone think that the How to Heretic is not going to talk about this?
Yeah, it's kind of what we're built to do. I mean, this
exactly.
is,
There's a lot of ground to cover here. This one, listeners, get some water, take a leak, whatever you got to do.
This would be a bit of a marathon segment, but I think it's going to be very worth it because
I agree.
At the end of the day, it's really about who really does and does not have to pay taxes in this country.
Yes,
and I think there is a time for a change a-coming.
Yeah, well, you're more optimistic than I am, but there's a lot of ground to cover. Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover here, and there's a lot to be pissed off about. So let's start with the details of the story and what has come out since, and then we'll dig into the Mormon policy of tithing, the unrelated assets of the church, and then some of the motivations for this unmitigated and shocking avarice of corporate Mormonism. Now, our friends over at Opening Arguments brought on Bryce Blankenagel from Naked Mormonism to do a deep dive into the legal aspects of this story, and we may indeed do that in the future. So I want to focus more on the history and context of this insanity.
Yeah, we're going to bring a legal expert on to talk about that aspect for sure.
We'll touch on it, but we are definitely not attorneys. So this Post article is based on a whistleblower complaint from a 41-year-old portfolio manager named David A. Nielsen. I'm not doxing him; his identity is out.
Yeah.
He worked for the church's investment division, Ensign Peak Advisors. He had help preparing this complaint from his twin brother, Lars. We'll talk a little bit about that. The very fact that a religious institution requires an investment division is the first of many red flags we'll talk about today. Ensign Peak, by the way, is a middling minor peak in the mountains to the northeast of Salt Lake, where Brigham Young hiked up to in 1847 to get his first look at the Salt Lake Valley. So Ensign Peak Advisors has only one client, the Mormon Church. As far as I can tell, it does not have a website. It employs around 20 people and was formed in late 1997. That date will become very relevant in a minute. Ensign Peak is registered as a supporting organization and integrated auxiliary of the church. So technically a 501c3 nonprofit organization, so tax exempt. This exemption, however, requires that Ensign Peak operate exclusively for religious, educational, or other charitable purposes. The main thrust of the Nielsen brothers' complaint is that the church has not met these requirements, and boy howdy do they seem to have a point. As we'll discuss, and because this is America, the church may not have violated any laws or may be able to maneuver their way out of trouble if they did, but a provision of IRS law is that whistleblowers can get a sizable percentage of monies recovered by the IRS. Whether this is the primary motivation for the Nielsen brothers is not relevant technically. But it seems that their disgust with this is the same as ours.
Yeah.
In resigning from Ensign Peak, David stated in a letter that his employment had become unworkable since his wife and children had left the church and wanted him to follow. It seems that being witness to truly historic graft and dishonesty by his church probably didn't help either.
Right.
Interestingly, the complaint was filed with the IRS in November, but Lars decided to leak it to the Post and come forward without David's permission or approval.
Huh.
Yeah, I really hope that David is okay and that the brothers can reconcile, because bringing this to the public's attention was a true act of bravery.
Yeah, very much so.
The complaint claims that when Ensign Peak Advisors was founded in 1997, The church's portfolio, so think of it like cash, basically, was around $12 billion, and that now it is in excess of $100 billion. The reason that there needed to be a leak in the first place...
this one fund.
This one fund.
We're not talking about all the church's money. We're talking about one fund.
And we'll talk about all the church's money, which is an unknown quantity.
Sure.
But it is a large. The reason there needed to be a leak in the first place was that 22 years ago, the Mormon Church, who at the time liked to brag about its wealth, went quiet and closed their books. The reason for this was an August 1997 cover article in Time called Kingdom Come, with a picture of on the cover of the Salt Lake Temple with Mormons ink splashed over it. You remember that?
Yeah. Mormons INC period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The article, especially for a religion with so
They're
many...
not squids. They don't spray ink. That's an ugly rumor, and I don't want people to keep spreading it. Stop it.
Right. It's
We're putting a stop to it.
They've stopped, yeah.
Yeah.
The article, especially for a religion with so many mostly fresh skeletons in its closet, was largely positive and laudatory about the church, its business acumen, its pious membership, the rehabilitated image of the church. It tread very lightly on some troublesome Mormon beliefs and controversies and quoted then President Gordon B. Hinckley extensively. I was in the process of leaving Mormonism at the time, but I remember that for Mormons, this article was seen as a smashing success. It almost only could have been worse.
Yeah, because Mormonism has always been chasing this perception of total legitimacy.
Yes.
And more American than Americans, right? That they are.
Yeah, exactly.
And so any good press that they can foster like that just makes them ecstatic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But in the article, it did claim that at the time, again, 1997, the church had over $30 billion in assets, an annual gross income of $6 billion, and a total investment portfolio of $12 billion. For reasons that we now know, someone in the upper echelons of the church did not like having the church's financial status in public view. And so only months after this story ran, the church formed Ensign Peak Advisors to handle their finances and stop disclosing financial information. And again, because this is America, religious institutions, unlike other nonprofits, are not required to publicly report their income and asset.
Right.
Yeah. So back to the complaint. It claims that the church takes in $7 billion in tithing revenue alone. That $6 billion in gross income from the Times article was tithing and all other income. Right. However, the tithing portion of that $6 billion back in 1997 was $5.2 billion. Wow. So I just want to plant a little flag here. If both the Times article and the whistleblower complaint are to be believed, the church's tithing income only rose $1.8 billion, or 24% in 22 years, while its membership rose by 41% over that same period. So this can only mean one of three things. The church is massively underreporting its revenue, massively overreporting its membership, or the vast majority of new members are from such poverty-stricken regions that their tithes are well behind the portion of the church living in developed countries.
I think all three of those things are true.
It could be all three.
Yeah,
right, exactly.
That's whistleblowers and people that have left the membership records department, right, have kind of intimated it's under 10 million is the active membership. And of course, the Mormons always claim 15 million, but
yeah. So the complaint alleges that of the $7 billion in tithing income, which does not include any revenue from the church's vast business empire, which we will talk about, $6 billion is used to cover annual operating costs, and the remaining $1 billion is transferred to Ensign Peak Advisors for investment purposes. Two things I want to talk about for a second: the church's tithing policy and the $6 billion in annual operating costs. So first, as our ex-Mormon listeners know, Mormons are required to pay 10% of their gross pre-tax, pre-expense income to the church in tithing. This is not a recommendation. At the end of each year, so basically right now, every Mormon that wishes to be in good standing meets with their local bishop, which is the equivalent of a parish priest, and basically has to demonstrate that they have paid a full tithe and settle up if they haven't.
Yeah.
So
you can't go to heaven if you don't pay your tithing. That's it.
No, it's fundamental.
You want to see Jesus? It's going to cost you this much. That's it.
Exactly.
It's that simple, right?
Members are encouraged to pay the full 10%, even if it means jeopardizing rent, missing meals, or having to go into debt. I wonder how those conversations are going this year. There are too many quotes from leaders of the church about tithing to mention here. I'll just give you one. Elder Valerie Cordone in 2017 General Conference related this little anecdote, quote, "One day during those difficult times, I heard my parents discussing whether they should pay tithing or buy food for the children. On Sunday, I followed my father to see what he was going to do. After our church meetings, I saw him take an envelope and put his tithing in it, end quote. He goes on a little bit. The next day, someone knocked on their door with an unexpected job opportunity, so they didn't end up starving. Cordone finishes with,
such bullshit.
Quote, that day I learned the principles of paying tithing and the blessings that follow, end quote. Yeah. Fucking bullshit.
I'm sorry. Growing up Mormon, every story that was a coercion to get money or service was always followed by some fucking miraculous the next day.
Exactly.
Right? There was a knock at the door, $1,000 fell out of the sky. It's just such bullshit.
Such bullshit.
And what was that guy's name? What was it?
His Valery Cordone. He is actually from Guatemala.
I was going to say that is not a very Caucasian name.
No, he's the exception that proves the rule.
Okay.
So just think about pulling 10% of your gross income. Again, before your income and Social Security taxes are pulled from your paycheck, before you pay rent, buy food or medicine, before you put anything away for savings, and giving it to one of the wealthiest corporations on earth and getting nothing in return.
Yeah.
At least you get Baby Yoda memes from Facebook.
Yeah.
So on top of all that, on the first Sunday of every month, Mormons are encouraged to fast, skipping breakfast and lunch, and then they are required to contribute what they would have spent on those meals to the church in the form of cash-only fast offerings.
I didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Well, you bounced before you had an income, so.
That's absolutely true.
Okay, so that's tithing. As to the $6 billion annual operating expense, it's important for everyone to know what the church does not pay for. Mm-hmm. The church does not pay its rank and file clergy. Most positions in the church, except for the highest levels, are volunteers. Not only does the Catholic Church provide housing for its clergy, it pays for their food and expenses and even a meager salary. Mm-hmm. The church does not pay for most of the maintenance, janitorial services, and groundskeeping for its estimated 18,000 churches, 217 temples, 4 universities, among gobs of other properties.
My God.
Members are called upon to provide those services.
Yeah.
The church doesn't pay for its missionary program. Families of the missionaries are required to pay $400 per month to cover the cost of this program. And as of July 2020, that number is going to $500 per month, making a 2-year mission cost a family $12,000.
Right.
Oh, and by the way, the answer is no. You can't deduct the cost of a mission from your tithing. You got to pay both.
Can you deduct it from your taxes?
I don't know.
I don't know either. But there's a very important point to be made here. Is not only do the hundreds of thousands of people that are in positions of like bishop, first counselor, Sunday school teacher, ward janitor, none of them are making any money. None of them make a penny for what can be 20, 30 hours a week worth of work, right?
Yeah.
And the church's Salesforce pays for the privilege of selling their product. So and missionaries are paying for their own missions. The church does not pay for them.
They're sent off for 2-year missions in the prime of their lives, often to harsh conditions where they live in shithole apartments on the verge of malnourishment, selling bullshit to people who probably know more about it than they do. Right. And you're right. They're paying for the fucking privilege of doing it.
Yeah. And when you said malnourishment,
institution in the world,
a lot of them are basically food insecure. Like that 400, now 500 in some places doesn't go very far. No. And they live in dumps, in insect infested dumps, and sometimes are like literally not eating, they're eating 1, maybe 2 meals a day if they're lucky.
Yeah, it's funny because you think missionaries universally joke about that. But if a labor force was treated like that by a corporation, it would be shut down.
And rightfully so, yeah.
Yeah. Because of their tax-exempt status, the church also does not contribute to the police or fire that keep their tens of thousands of properties safe. We do.
Right.
I'm going to go full Elizabeth Warren here.
Right.
The church does not pay to maintain the roads, water treatment, electrical grid, and educational system that enables their members to make the money that this racket skims 10% off the top of.
Right.
It does not pay for the judicial system that it avails itself so often. Mm-hmm. We pay for all of that.
Mm-hmm.
None of these costs are included in the church's $6 billion annual operating budget. This budget includes all development, maintenance, social welfare and relief, education, and the meager overhead for the few paid employees, and of course, the far more lavish pay for the general authorities. So, nice. So the church started with a $12 billion portfolio in 1997, which was an astounding amount of money at the time, and that has been squirreling its net tithing income to Ensign Peak, which has grown that amount to over $100 billion tax-free dollars. And according to the complaint, they have dispersed none of that money to any religious, educational, or charitable activity in those intervening 22 years. Mm-hmm. They are just sitting on it like Smaug in The Hobbit. The church has, however, on 2 occasions, parted ways with a small amount of their filthy lucre. In 2009, the church-owned insurance firm Beneficial Life was teetering because it had gone in big on mortgage-backed securities. Excuse me. Another church-owned property, Deseret Management, injected $594 million into Beneficial Life.
Wow.
The church claimed that no tithing monies were used to bail out that firm. But
which is clearly a lie, right?
Yeah. According to the complaint, right before that cash injection, $600 million was withdrawn from Ensign Peak, making that the first withdrawal from that account. I'm sure there's a perfectly legitimate explanation for that coincidence that does not involve illegal acts or dishonesty.
Right.
Even after that bailout, Beneficial Life terminated the vast majority of its employees. Then between 2009 and 2014, Ensign Peak pumped $1.4 billion in several installment payments into the City Creek Mall that the church partly owns. The mall was hit by the financial crisis as well and has been struggling due to online retailing. Mm-hmm. So it seems that God's one true religion was unable to predict the real estate bubble or the rise of Amazon.
Yeah, and let's just talk about this mall for half a second. This is basically 2 full city blocks of downtown Salt Lake City.
Yeah, it's enormous.
This is an enormous piece of, and Salt Lake City blocks are huge, right? Yeah. So this is God knows how many square feet, and it includes office towers. It includes residential towers. Mm-hmm. So it's not just like the little mall out on the edge of town. This is a massive, massive facility.
Yeah, and ostentatious also, and when with a retractable roof
and rules, and even though it is open to the public, and it is a tax-free facility because it is church property, there are also posted rules about showing same-sex attraction. So it is just shit in every conceivable way.
When the mall was proposed back in 2003, the church took some criticism that shopping malls didn't seem to dovetail with the core mission of building up the kingdom of God. Mm-hmm. So then President Gordon B. Hinckley once again promised that no tithing monies would be used for the development of this project. But to be fair, he never said tithing monies wouldn't be used to bail it out. So there. I just want to add one more detail. Being a partially owned, church-owned business, the mall is not open on Sundays. You could see that trying to get major retailers like Banana Republic or Apple to come to your mall when they would lose out on one of their biggest shopping days of the week would be a tough sell. Mm. No worries, said the church. Come to City Creek and we will discount your rent commensurate with your lost revenue.
Yeah, we'll buy your Sundays out.
Yeah, basically we'll buy your Sundays out. Again, sitting on $100 billion, crushing their members to pay what meager monies they have. And not for nothing, but the City Creek Mall basically devastated another local mall only a couple miles away by recruiting all of the big money retailers. So, toss that on the pile.
Yeah.
Before we talk about how just mind-blowingly massive this amount of money is, let's talk for a second about the Mormon Church's assets, which are not included in that $100 billion and may very well eclipse it. So, like I mentioned before, the church owns over 18,000 church houses around the world, and in almost every case owns the properties free and clear.
Wow.
Some of these parcels are quite small. Some are quite large. The church owns 217 temples on some of the most prime real estate in some of the most expensive markets in the world.
Yeah.
Each of these parcels is large, some encompassing several city blocks.
The one in Los Angeles and Santa Monica, you cannot believe it is on acres and acres and acres of land.
It's unbelievable.
One of the most expensive real estate markets in the country.
Yeah, Mormon temples grace prominent, often freeway-adjacent parcels in nearly every city in Utah, as well as Los Angeles, San Diego, Washington, D.C., Hawaii, Alberta, Paris, Rome, Mexico City, Sao Paulo, London, Kyiv, Melbourne, Seoul, and Tokyo, for example.
Right.
The church owns Deseret Cattle and Citrus Ranch, the largest cattle ranch in the United States, which comprises 290,000 acres, or 2% of the state of Florida, making the church the largest private landowner in that state. Mm-hmm. The church owns Ag Reserves, the largest nut producer in the U.S. The church owns 4 universities, BYU in Provo, BYU Idaho in Rexburg, BYU Hawaii, and the LDS Business College here in Salt Lake City. Mm. The church owns majority holdings in the aforementioned Beneficial Life Group, Bonneville International, the 14th largest radio chain in America, the Deseret News, the second largest newspaper in Utah. According to Mormon Leaks, there are 13 LLCs whose domains are hosted by church servers. I won't read them all, but here's a taste. Ashmore Wealth Management, Clifton Park Capital Management, Cortland Advisors, Elk Fork Partners, Green Valley Investors, Triverton Asset Management, etc. These 13 LLCs in 2017 had a combined...
a lot of those sound like investment funds.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But those 13 LLCs in 2017 had a combined value of $32.7 billion. Just that little piece. God. The church owns high-rise apartment buildings in Salt Lake, Dallas, and Philadelphia. Like we've talked about, the church is part owner in the $2 billion City Creek Mall. The church owns farms, ranches, orchards, flour mills, timber mills, tourist resorts, clothing companies, transportation companies, television stations, banks, mortgage companies, restaurants. The list goes on and on. The church owns massive tracts of land and associated businesses totaling more than 1 million acres spread across the globe in the U.S., Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Australia, and England, just for example.
Jesus Christ.
And the church owns a particularly strange 14,465 acre tract of land in Jackson County, Missouri, which, according to Mormon lore, is the site of the original Garden of Eden and will be the site of the Second Coming. More on that in a minute.
Wait, how much land?
14,465 acres in Jackson County.
Oh, my God.
No one truly knows the breadth and depth of the Mormon empire. And when I say no one, that might actually be true. Right. We'll talk about the extraordinary secrecy associated with the church's finances in a minute. But as far as its assets, I am only scratching the surface.
Right.
So let's go back to the $100 billion that Ensign Peak Advisors is sitting on. Uncle Mark, you were tweeting about this the other day. Can you give us some context here on the size of that nut?
Yeah. So I think, for anyone who isn't sitting on this hoard of money, and maybe even those who are, it is so difficult to wrap your head around the power that this money represents in a world where things are based on money.
Right.
So here's just some examples, just simple stuff I just Googled to figure out what this money represents. So $100 billion.
Yeah.
NASA's annual operating budget is $25 billion, right? So and for $25 billion, we can put fucking probes on Mars and shoot shit past Pluto, right?
Right.
For a quarter of that fund, we can do that shit. The Coast Guard, good guys who, protect the coast and pluck people off sinking ships and shit like that. Their annual budget is just over $11 billion.
Wow.
The Centers for Disease Control, the guys that struggle to keep Ebola away and keep World War Z from actually happening, have to do it with $11 billion a year. So this fund is 10 times bigger than that. Have you ever seen the Golden Gate Bridge? Stunning, right?
Beautiful.
A massive public works project that is a defining symbol of American civilization in a country with collapsing infrastructure that in today's dollars would be $1.5 billion to build.
Fuck off.
This fund could build 4.5 Golden Gate bridges every year just on the interest it accrues without taking a penny from the $100 billion.
Jesus.
The United States Sovereign Wealth Fund, a huge pile of cash that the U.S., like most other countries, have for different sorts of investments. Big investment fund, by somebody with a lot of fucking resources, is just $150 billion. So the Sovereign Wealth Fund of the United States is just 50% bigger than the one owned by a contracting regional Christian offshoot that doesn't have to pay one fucking penny to the country that houses and protects it.
Wow.
Now, how about ending homelessness in America? A consortium of charities and researchers on the subject came up with a figure of $20 billion to end homelessness in the U.S. Just one arm of the Mormon financial octopus could end homelessness in the U.S. 5 times over, or just once, and keep $80 billion and be deservedly hailed as heroes forever and ever.
For real.
We'd have to go off the air. It'd be like, well, these fucking guys just nailed it, right?
Wow.
So how about another opportunity to do a good thing in the real world that would be a fucking bargain compared to ending homelessness? Flint, Michigan is, years after discovering the problem, still drinking poisoned water from their lead-contaminated system. The high-end estimate of fixing that is $216 million.
Wow.
They could take 1% of the Ensign Peak Fund, peel off just 21% of that, and save hundreds of thousands of people from slow poisoning. You want good press, you assholes? This would be a good start. So how about a little good closer to home? Helping out real living Mormons on whose backs this galaxy of money was built. Utah has the lowest per pupil spending in the United States in its school system by a lot.
We're number one.
We're number 50. $7,635 per pupil. New York is nearly 20,000.
Wow.
Pennsylvania is double Utah, and even stupid Wyoming is over $18,000 per pupil per year. This is a fucking crime against the future. As our friend Andrew Seidel of the Freedom from Religion Foundation recently wrote in the Salt Lake Tribune, the church could give $3,000 to every Mormon on earth, and that's taking their high estimate, and give every single public school in Utah $10 million and still have more money in just one of its holdings than the sovereign wealth fund of Malaysia, a resource-rich country with 32 million people. I added the Malaysia bit at the end. Andrew didn't write that. Or if they hate being on the right side of history, which, to be honest, every single action Mormonism has ever undertaken is evidence of that, they could be a hero to the villainous and pay for Trump's border wall and still have $80 billion left to fund the Space Force and cover whatever Don Jr. and Eric are skimming off for eternity. So you could go on and on and on. Like, yeah, it is so goddamn much money.
It's so much money. So, yeah, and this revelation is going to make the church's bragging about its charitable efforts a little harder to sell. And those of us that have roots in the church know that they never tire of bragging about all the good they do with their resources. Mm-hmm. So let's take a look at that for a second. The church claimed last year that its charitable arm had spent $2.2 billion since 1985 on welfare, humanitarian aid, and other international charitable projects.
Since 85?
Since 85.
Okay.
$2.2 billion over 34 years is $64 million per year. Okay. That's $2.2 billion more than I have given in that time. But two things to contemplate here. We have to take them on their word that this is what they have given based on the fact that their books are closed. Let's just say that given their reflexive dishonesty about all things money, it would not shock me to find out that this number is inflated. In fact, in 2012, Bloomberg estimated the church's annual charitable giving at $52 million, not $64. But let's take them at their word that at $64 million, compared to just their tithing income alone, it amounts to less than 1% of their gross income. Mm-hmm. Well, let's step back a bit and add a wee bit more context and a whole lot more money. Going further, if we assume that the gross revenue number is correct and that the Ensign Peak portfolio is correct, and we further assume that the current assets of the church, including property, business holdings, and related income, is only worth $50 billion, which seems naively and comically conservative.
Right.
That's $157 billion in revenue and assets the church has right now, making that $64 million of annual charitable income less than 0.04%, basically a rounding error.
Yeah.
Like not 1%, 0.04%.
Right. And let me just jump in here quick. And people can go, oh, well, fuck you. They're good at saving money. Sure, they're great at saving money, but they don't pay, as Doug mentioned, they don't pay for any public good. Right. And the point of being a 501c3 is that you are providing a public good, not a private good. Right. So a private good would be what they provide to their members through religious services or spiritual blah, blah, blah. That's not the point of a 501c3.
Exactly.
It has to be providing something for people that are not members of its club. And they don't.
They don't.
Yeah.
And not only do they not provide a service, they don't pay the taxes that keep this society running.
Right.
All right. Let's talk about the secrecy surrounding all this wealth. According to the complaint, only 4 senior Ensign Peak executives are permitted to see the company's full financial statements. The complaint details several incidents that show the lengths that Ensign Peak is willing to go to keep this under wraps. One is an account of Apostle Boyd K. Packer, who was equal parts powerful and awful, and was the president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles at the time, going to Ensign Peak to demand to know how much money it had amassed, and they turned him away.
Right.
That is insane.
If you know anything about Mormon power structures, it is inconceivable that even the number 3 guy could tell the number 2 guy to piss off.
Exactly. It's so hierarchical.
It was nothing. It was just some functionary telling the number 2 guy to piss off, right?
Yep. Another account accused the church of fudging an audit of BYU to keep the secret. Since BYU receives federal funding, because again, this is America, there needed to be an independent audit to verify the size of BYU's endowment. Any such audit would end up seeing what was being hoarded. So this is so crazy. When independent auditor Deloitte & Touche came knocking, the church got one of its members, Mark Stevens, who happened to be an audit director at Deloitte, to convince them to approve the audit without actually letting any auditors do an audit.
What? So they didn't do an
audit? They just said, you're going to have to take our word for it.
Oh, my God.
After a few years of this, Deloitte felt uncomfortable and parted ways. So Ensign Peak painstakingly bifurcated its holdings and set up enough layers that auditors would only see what Ensign Peak wanted them to see. Basically, so, and this is the quote from the complaint, they would audit a cup of water instead of an entire ocean.
Wow.
So the amazing thing is, they did manage to keep this a secret for so long. We asked a listener of ours who's a hedge fund manager about this, and he said that the fact that they had been able to keep this a secret is the most amazing thing of all.
Yeah.
A fund of this size would be, in his words, an absolute powerhouse on Wall Street, and basically everyone in the investment industry would know their name.
I think I read, Doug, that this makes it that it is one of the 5 largest private funds in the world.
Yeah, it's up there with Apple and all those things.
Like the Bill and Melinda Gates Fund
is dramatic, but yeah,
is $64 billion.
Right. So I am no financial or investment expert, so I'll never understand how $12 billion turns into $100 billion by simply moving money around. But you know who does know how to do that? The leadership of the Mormon Church. Uniquely among major religions, the upper echelons of the Mormon Church are to a man successful businessmen.
Mm-hmm.
Think 150 minor Mitt Romneys.
Yeah.
It's kind of the elephant in the room of Mormonism that living a charitable life among the poor is the last way you would ever end up in leadership.
Right.
Conversely, becoming a robber baron almost guarantees you a spot.
They are very into what is essentially the prosperity gospel.
Yes.
Right. And we were told this pretty bluntly when we were kids. If you remember this, Doug, that financial success was a reflection of spiritual success.
I remember the boat wars in our neighborhoods when neighbors were buying bigger and bigger boats to compete with each other.
Yeah.
So this gaggle of corporate raiders run an enormous corporation with a free labor force, $7 billion in tax-exempt income, and an advertising and sales department that's paying to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
Of course they're going to turn a profit.
Yeah.
One thing that bears mentioning is that the Mormon Church was founded on greed. It's its prime directive. I'm not being mean here. Joseph Smith, Sidney Rigdon, and Oliver Cowdery wrote the Book of Mormon to make a quick buck on the gullibility of the burned-over district. Joseph founded banks that went bankrupt, made his own worthless currency that he never honored, defaulted on loans, and straight up stole from his followers, sometimes including their wives and daughters.
Mm-hmm.
Check this out. Of the 112 revelations Joseph Smith claimed to receive, fully 88 were about financial matters.
Wow. Wait, tell me those numbers again?
Of the 112 revelations Joseph Smith claimed to receive, 88 were about finances.
Most of them?
Most of them.
I had no idea.
When the church got to Utah, it brought greed along for the ride. In the Utah territory, Mormons were mandated to only patronize church-owned businesses in order to run out competition. This got so bad that the U.S. Congress passed the Edmunds-Tucker Act in 1887, specifically to stop that Mormon practice and to further outlaw polygamy. So the Mormon infatuation with money and willingness to cheat to get it is nothing new, but why this otherworldly level of graft and naked avarice? Yeah. Your basic 501c3 wants to end the year with little to no money on its balance sheet that is not allocated, dispersed, or donated. Why is the Mormon Church hoarding so much fucking cash? So here's a reason that I think might be too stupid even for the church. In the complaint, Ensign Peak's president, Roger Clark, has told people that this money would be used in the event of the second coming. This is such a stupid thing to say that it only proves one thing. Being rich does not automatically make you smart. What? Did I miss that part of the Bible? I mean, after Jesus returns, there will still be a market-based, currency-driven economy?
Well, when you did the two-parter on Revelation, there was still some guy selling cups. I remember that. Seriously. But, in case you don't already have a cup, you need $100 billion.
Yeah. I mean, I wasn't aware that Armageddon involved liquidity events and stock buybacks, but that's me.
Right. Interest will continue to accrue and we'll all still be paying our mortgages.
Explain this thinking to me. The church already owns the real estate where Christ is supposed to land.
Right.
Members already have at least 1 year's supply of food.
Yeah.
The church owns enough buildings to house their entire membership should that need arise. Why the fuck are they sitting on so much money? I truly believe.
And why hide it? Why go to such incredible lengths? As our listener friend explained to us, hiding that much money is almost impossible.
Yeah.
And why be so dishonest and duplicitous and create all these front groups, et cetera, et cetera? Why?
Yeah. I mean, I truly believe it's just naked, unrestrained, sanctified greed.
Sure.
And it's hard to square that much hoarding of money with, say, Luke 16:13, you cannot serve God and money. Or Timothy 6:10, for the love of money is the root of all evil. Or Luke 16:10 and 11, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with very much. Or Matthew 16:19, for where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Or Matthew 19:23-24, then Jesus said unto his disciples, verily I say unto you that a rich man shall hardly enter into the kingdom of heaven. Doug, I could go on and on.
It's not fair to use the Bible against Christians. That's not cool. That's not how they would like you to play this game. So stop.
I mean, if there are any through threads in the Bible, it's that amassing wealth is bad, and you should be nice to immigrants. So,
yeah. Well, but I just want to make one thing clear that can be inferred from what we're saying, and I don't think we're inferring it. Is the paid upper clergy, so the 12 apostles and the first presidency of the church, 3 dudes, they make an income and they make decent money, but I don't think we're inferring that they're actually pocketing this. I don't think that's what's happening.
Which is even stranger, honestly.
Right. It's just greed. It's like BYU sex. It's kind of the thing without being the thing. It's like, What's the point of it? Like, why, if nobody's just taking this money to live or to hoard personally, what is the point of it?
The point. The church itself has responded to this story with a statement from the first presidency, which says most tithing income is immediately used for the needs of the church, but that, quote, a portion is methodically safeguarded through wise financial management and the building of a prudent reserve for the future.
I'll say.
That statement sounds like it comes from a small community credit union and is unworthy of the $100 billion pile of cash it seeks to dismiss.
Yeah.
All of this being said, including the shady attempts to keep the secret and the 2 clearly non-religious disbursements to Beneficial Life and City Creek Mall, it is entirely possible that the church has not violated the law. And because, after all, this is America. Again, opening arguments went deep into the legality of the questions raised here. And I am most definitely not a lawyer, and Andrew Torres most definitely is. But there's some context that matters here. According to the applicable law, 26 USC 501c3, which is where nonprofits get their name, religious nonprofits are required to operate exclusively for religious, educational, or other charitable purposes, which it seems pretty clear Ensign Peak is not doing. Mm-hmm. However, according to the church, stockpiling money for the apocalypse is an expressly religious purpose.
Yeah.
In their statement, they say, all church funds exist for no other reason than to support the church's divinely appointed mission. Basically, hoarding a pile of money to not only buy the Thunderdome, but also all of Bartertown is their mission. And at least according to the law, they might have a point.
Yeah. That is what's so disheartening is despite all the lying and the hiding, it could be entirely legal.
Entirely legal. The law further states that in order to qualify for tax-exempt status, an organization's grants must be, quote, commensurate in scope with its financial resources. What exactly that means is far from settled, but it seems like Ensign Peak's grants have been a little less than commensurate in scope with its financial resources. But in an argument over definitions, the guy with $100 billion in the bank is probably going to win.
Yeah.
Given the fact that the church could hire every tax attorney in the country without having to even touch the $100 billion stockpile, and given the fact that 4 U.S. senators are Mormon, don't expect the church to face any actual legal trouble or expect to see them have their tax-exempt status seriously threatened. They are too powerful, they are too rich, and the law is murky at best. The real question at the end of all of this is that it seems that they can hoard money like this, but should they?
Yeah.
This money represents sincere sacrifice from its members. It could do significant good in the world, and it is just sitting there. The church does not even really have a plan for how it might spend this money or what would trigger it to start. All our Mormon listeners out there, and we know you're out there, you have to look in the mirror and ask yourself one simple question. Are you in fact money? No? Well, I'm afraid the leadership of the church does not care about you.
If you look in the mirror and George Washington is not staring back at you, get the fuck out of there.
George Washington is Benjamin Franklin. Think of it as a matter of priorities, like you said, Uncle Mark, when we were talking about this the other day. They could solve myriad problems in the world and in their local community, and every day they don't.
Yeah.
So
they get up every morning and they don't do it.
Yep. So that was a long journey. I hope anyone's left listening to the.
But it's like, a lot. I'm certainly one of those people that has said many times tax churches. Well, I want to add a little nuance to that. If a church wants to be a 501c3 and do public good in exchange for not paying taxes, right? I will never be in a position where I don't have to pay taxes. And that's how I buy civilization, right? That's how I get the things that civilization provides me. It buys the good things and the bad things, right? The roads and the bombs. But if churches if they were transparent and they could demonstrate through auditing the public good they were doing, right, and we could all go, wow, they are doing public good. They are feeding X number of people. They are providing this. I think that would be a great start. And then they could remain tax-free. But for some reason, they don't have to do what every other 501c3 has to do and prove themselves as a public good. I'm against it.
Well, we got through it. It's the more you think about it, the more you contextualize it, the worse it gets.
Yeah.
It's disgusting, naked, awful,
avarice.
Avarice.
Pure avarice. And again, because I don't think any of them are really personally profiting from it, it's even weirder. Right?
Yeah, truly. It's just for the love of money.
Yep, for the love of money. All right. Well, with that depressing shit, let's move on.
Moving on.